You're a burden now, that's what my son said, as he handed me grocery bags and slammed the door in my face. My daughter. She laughed, not nervously, mockingly. Then she deadbolted the house I paid off in full, from the inside. I stood outside in the cold with everything I owned stuffed between bananas and paper towels, and that wasn't even the real betrayal. 3 months earlier, they'd secretly gutted my business, stripped the accounts, clean, left me holding every cent of debt. But I built that company from nothing. Every contract, every payroll, every signature. They thought they'd buried me. But 20 minutes later, I found something with their names on it, and my late wife's clause that changes everything. My name is Milton Carver, and I'm 75 years old. Each morning I still wake at 5 a.m. to stare at my empty factory from across the street. For 50 years, Carver Manufacturing was more than a business. It was my heartbeat, my identity. The steam from my dawn coffee mingles with ghost scents of machine oil, those quiet hallways now holding only echoes. My son Robert and daughter Cynthia, who once brought their children to play among the drill presses, won't meet my eyes anymore. Their smiles turned cold when the contracts dried up, their patience wearing thin with each creditor's call. What they don't know is that their mother Margaret, my late wife, left behind carefully worded estate documents I've never fully examined. My hands may have aged, but my mind stays sharp as ever. But let me start from the beginning. That final afternoon at Carver Manufacturing felt like a funeral. I walked those familiar aisles one last time, running my hand along cold metal workbenches where I'd spent half a century building not just parts, but pride. Every step echoed differently now that the machines were silent. Remember that hollow sound when you walk through an empty house? Multiply that by 50 years of memories. You ever notice how the simplest actions become brutal when they're final? My fingers trembled turning that last key in the steel door. 48 years of dawn to dusk work, 300 employees at our peak, and now just me, standing there as the sunset painted everything in. Failing light. The recession had done what 2 market crashes couldn't, killed our last standing contracts. I drove to Robert's place that evening, my chest tight, but my hopes intact. See, I'd given that boy everything. Paid his engineering degree in full, even bought him and his wife that fancy suburban house they lived in. Same with Cynthia's law school and her starter home. Surely that counted for something now that I needed a temporary roof. That Sunday dinner, though, I should have read the warning signs. Robert kept staring at his phone, barely glancing up when I tried catching his eye. Cynthia just sat there, tapping her wine glass with those manicured nails, the same hands I'd once bandaged after bicycle falls. The gravy went cold while silence spread like frost across the table. I just need a few weeks, I said finally, my voice steadier than I felt. Just until I can reorganize. How the finances, maybe sell some equipment? Robert's jaw tightened. You know that look when someone's about to say something they've rehearsed? That's what I saw. Dad, he cut in, each word dropping like ice. You're a burden now. My fork clattered against china. 50 years of dignity crumbled faster than the untouched bread on my plate. Cynthia's laugh, God, that laugh will haunt me, cut through the air like static. Really, Father? What did you expect? You're just... She swirled her wine, watching it catch the light. A washed-up old man. The world tilted sideways. These were my children, the same ones who'd once climbed into my lap for bedtime stories. The same daughter who'd insisted on wearing my safety goggles while helping in the shop. The same son who'd proudly shown me every A+ in calculus. But the faces looking back at me now belonged to strangers. We took the liberty, Robert said, standing up, of packing some essentials. He gestured toward the front door where 2 grocery bags sat waiting, just like that. 40 years of fatherhood reduced to whatever they deemed essential enough to stuff between the produce and paper towels. My legs felt wooden as I stood. Somehow I made it to those bags, lifted them with hands that had once hefted engine blocks. The door opened, then closed behind me, with a click that echoed like a judge's gavel. Standing on that porch, the same one I'd helped Robert sand and stain last summer, I heard the deadbolt turn. Just like that final key at the factory, only this lock was sealing me out of my own flesh and blood. Ever hear the sound of a deadbolt sliding home when you're on the wrong side? It sounds an awful lot like betrayal. Act I, the betrayal. Night air has a way of biting deeper when you're standing where you don't belong. I gripped those grocery bag handles. the same kind I'd used to carry work ledgers back when I had work to track, and tried to steady my breathing. The sharp autumn wind found every crack in my old bones, but it wasn't the cold making me shake. Behind that door I heard Cynthia's laughter floating through, muffled but clear enough to twist the knife. You know that sound when someone's laughing at you, not with you? Even through walls you can tell the difference. I should have moved, should have walked somewhere, but my feet felt welded to that porch like they were waiting for the past hour to make sense. 50 years of building something from nothing, of teaching my kids the value of honest work. And this was my reward. Standing in the dark with whatever they decided I deserved to keep. That's when I heard it. The distinct hiss of air brakes, followed by the rumble of a diesel engine that needed its timing checked. I'd know that sound anywhere. Through blurry eyes, I watched a familiar dented Ford pickup roll to a stop at the curb. Frank Martinez, my old foreman, sat behind the wheel, reading the whole scene in one glance. You ever see someone size up a situation and skip right past the useless questions? That was Frank. 25 years running my shop floor had taught him when to talk and when to act. He didn't ask if I was okay. We both knew I wasn't. He didn't ask what happened. The grocery bag said enough. "Get in," he said, leaning across to push open the passenger door. The dome light caught the gray in his mustache and the hard set of his jaw. "You've got two options, Milton." I stumbled down the steps, my knees arguing every move. The truck's heater was running full blast, fighting off more than just the cold. "Option 1, Frank said, eyes on the dashboard clock. "I've got a cot in my garage. You can take it, keep quiet, let them think they've won." His fingers drummed once on the steering wheel. "Option 2, you've got 20 minutes to decide if you're going to fight back. Clock's ticking." 20 minutes? My voice sounded like it had aged another decade. "Why 20? Because in 20 minutes, that office park where you stored the company files closes for the night. Security changes, shifts. And if there's anything in those records worth fighting with..." He tapped the clock again. "We need to move now." I stared at those red digital numbers. 8:40 p.m. The taste of copper filled my mouth as my heart hammered against old ribs. Fight back? At 75? When my own children had just shown exactly what they thought of me? But then I looked down at my hands. These fingers had signed every contract, approved every payroll, built something real from nothing but grit and determination. They still knew how to grip a wrench, still knew how to work, still knew every signature they'd ever put to paper. Remember what I said about age not stopping a clean fight. "Drive," I said. Frank didn't wait for more. The truck lurched forward as he hit the gas, tires grabbing pavement like they understood the stakes. I watched Robert's porch light shrink in the side mirror, counting each minute that ticked by on that dashboard clock. 18 minutes left. You want to know something about humiliation? It burns cleaner when you decide it won't be the last chapter. Each street light we passed was another second gone, but also another second closer to whatever came next. 16 minutes. The truck's engine growled as Frank took a corner faster than he should have. Neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. Sometimes silence says more than words ever could. 14 minutes. I thought about Margaret then, my late wife, who'd always said our children needed to learn the difference between being given something and earning it. Wonder what she'd say if she could see them now. 12 minutes. The office park's lights grew larger in the windshield. My hands had stopped shaking. Funny how having a plan, even a desperate one, steadies a person. "Almost there," Frank muttered, more to the clock than to me. "You ready?" I nodded, watching those red numbers count down our window of chance. They thought an old man would just fade away quiet. "Their mistake," Frank said, swinging the truck into the parking lot. The key stuck in the lock. It always had. But Frank knew the trick. Half turn back, slight lift, then forward. The door creaked open into darkness that smelled like dust and old toner cartridges. You know that smell? Every office has it. Like time itself settling into the carpet. "Light switch should be..." Frank started. "Left side, hip height," I finished. I'd installed it myself back in '82. My fingers found it exactly where muscle memory said it would be. Fluorescent tubes flickered to life overhead, humming like tired wasps. The space that had been my private office was now a makeshift storage room. Cardboard boxes towered in narrow corridors, each one labeled, in my own handwriting, Contracts 2018-2020, Vendor Invoices, Bank Statements, 30 years of business life reduced to paper and ink. You ever wonder why I kept all this? I asked Frank, running a hand along one of the boxes. Could have gone digital like everyone else. Frank snorted. Because you always said paper can't be hacked. He grabbed the nearest box, hefting it onto the conference table that still dominated the room's center. And right about now I'm thinking that wasn't just old man stubbornness. Have you ever noticed how the past has weight? Not just metaphorically, I mean the actual physical heft of it. Each banker's box we dragged out felt like it was filled with more than just paper. Memories came with every label. Late nights reviewing contracts, morning meetings with suppliers, proud moments watching my signature dry on documents that meant growth, progress, legacy. The fluorescent light above the table buzzed and flickered as we spread everything out. Frank found an old red pen in a desk drawer, still worked because I'd never bought cheap supplies, and I started circling dates, amounts, account numbers. At first it was just methodology, the same careful process I'd used to review books every month for 50 years. Then I saw it. A wire transfer confirmation. Then another. And another. Frank. I whispered. My voice sounded strange, even to me. Look at these dates. He leaned in, squinting at the papers. 3 months before shutdown, what am I seeing? Equipment transfers, account transfers, asset transfers. My hand trembled as I drew red circles. All to accounts I never authorized. But look at the names. Frank's breath hissed between his teeth. Robert Carver. Cynthia Carver. They'd moved everything. Machinery, inventory, cash, reserves. Everything of value transferred neat and quiet into accounts they controlled, months before I had to close the doors, and they'd left behind. The liabilities, I said, the words tasting like acid. Every debt, every outstanding payment. They left it all sitting in the original accounts. You ever have a moment when the floor seems to tilt under your feet? When the air gets thick and your chest feels like it's being squeezed in a vice? I had to brace myself against the table, papers crinkling under my palms. Milton, Frank's voice seemed to come from very far away. They knew, I managed. They knew I was going under, so they stripped it. Everything I saved, everything I built. They took it all and left me holding empty bags. My chest hurt. Real pain. Not just the metaphorical kind. I pressed my palm against my ribs, trying to steady my breathing. Margaret whispered, though I'm not sure why. Maybe because she would have known what to say. Maybe because she would have seen this coming. The signatures were right there in front of me. Robert's aggressive slant. Cynthia's looping curves. Signatures I'd watched them practice as children, now used to gut everything I'd built. Frank's hand landed on my shoulder. Sit down before you fall down. I didn't argue. My legs didn't feel trustworthy anymore. The chair creaked as I sank into it, staring at the proof spread across the table. Every cushion I'd tried to build, every safety net I'd woven over decades, all of it gone with a few strokes of a pen. You know that moment when your body decides the fight is over before your mind agrees? That's where I was, slumped in my old office chair, staring at those transfer documents like they were obituaries. The silence in that room felt heavier than all those boxes we'd moved. Maybe, I heard myself say, maybe that cot doesn't sound so bad right now. My bones ached. My chest still felt tight. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like they were laughing at me, and for a second I could have sworn they sounded just like Cynthia's wine-soaked chuckle. Frank's boots thumped against the thin carpet as he left the room. Part of me thought he was taking my surrender at face value, leaving me to wallow. Would have been fair, I was doing a pretty good job of wallowing. But then those boots thumped back and a paper cup of break-room coffee appeared under my nose. The stuff was strong enough to strip paint, but right then it smelled like clarity itself. Drink, Frank ordered. Then look at this. He thrust his phone in front of me, its calendar app open. Something was highlighted in red. My eyes took a moment to focus. Today's deadline for quarterly filings, Frank said. 5 p.m. sharp. Miss it and we wait 3 months for another window. I took a scalding sip of coffee. What difference does that make? They've already... It makes all the difference. Frank's voice had that same tone he'd used when training new workers on the shop floor. File today, and we can flag these transfers. Get them frozen before they move anything else. Wait till Monday, and that money could be in the Cayman Islands. You ever notice how hope feels physically different from despair? My spine straightened just a fraction. What time is it now? Coming up on 2. 3 hours. Maybe less, depending on traffic to the courthouse. I pulled a legal pad from my desk drawer. Yellow pages still crisp because I always bought the good ones. Frank, you said we just now. He crossed his arms. Damn right I did. I nodded, uncapped my pen. Then grab. That scanner from accounting. We need exhibits. Everything with their signatures, everything showing dates and amounts. Email chains too, if you can find them. What are you going to do? Draft the affidavit. My hand was steady now as I wrote the date at the top of the page. Everything in chronological order. Every transfer, every conversation I can remember. Times, places, exact words if I've got them. My watch read 1:52 when I started writing. The wall clock above my desk ticked louder than I remembered, like it was counting down ammunition instead of seconds. Frank's scanner hummed in the background, pages shuffling through it like playing cards. Have you ever tried to compress your whole world into bullet points, to take the betrayal that's crushing your chest and turn it into dry legal language? Each paragraph felt like lifting weights, but I kept going. Dates, dollar amounts, asset descriptions. The way Robert wouldn't meet my eyes when I mentioned cash flow problems last month. The smirk on Cynthia's face when she asked if I'd checked the accounts lately. Frank appeared at my elbow, with printouts still warm from the scanner. Board meeting notes, email threads, transfer authorizations with timestamps that proved premeditation. I arranged them by date, each one a piece of ammunition in what was starting to feel less like surrender and more like a counterattack. The manila folder grew fat as we worked, its metal clasp straining against the weight of evidence. When I finally looked up from the last paragraph, the wall clock showed 2:40. I met Frank's eyes. In all our years working together, we'd never needed many words. Drive, I said. He nodded once and grabbed his keys. The folder felt hot in my hands as I followed him out, like all that betrayal had somehow warmed the paper inside. The truck door slammed behind me like a judge's gavel. The pickup's tires squealed as Frank took the corner onto Main Street. I braced against the dashboard, watching his ancient truck's clock tick from 2:15 to 2:16. You know that feeling when every minute feels like it's stealing your last chance? That's what was burning in my gut. You remember where to park? I asked. Frank snorted. Milton, I've been dodging parking tickets at the courthouse for 30 years. Loading zone, west side. The downtown buildings threw long shadows across our windshield. Late afternoon sun hit the courthouse's glass front like it was on fire, and I caught our reflection as we pulled up. Two old men moving faster than dignity usually allows, but dignity's funny that way. Sometimes it's not about how you look, it's about why you're running. I've got more scanning to do, Frank said, pulling a portable scanner from under the seat. You go ahead, I'll catch up. My knees protested as I climbed out, but I barely noticed. The manila folder was thick in my hands as I pushed through the revolving door. Cool air hit me like a wake-up slap. Remember how government buildings always smell the same? That mix of floor wax and paper and frustrated people? The courthouse lobby hadn't changed since I'd served jury duty, back in '82. Same marble floors, same echo of footsteps, same security guard who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. The clerk's office was on 3. I jabbed the elevator button twice, not that it helped, and used the ride to straighten my exhibit tabs. A through G, each one a knife in my children's betrayal, all arranged just so. You learn a thing or two about organization running a shop for 50 years. The clerk looked exactly like I'd expected. Young, harried, with the kind of tired eyes that come from reading other people's problems all day. Her nameplate said, Andrea. Good afternoon, I said, keeping my voice steady. I need to file an emergency petition regarding fraudulent transfers. She glanced at the clock. Cut it pretty close today, didn't you? Didn't have much choice. I spread the documents across her counter, pointing to the key sections I'd highlighted. These transfers were discovered this morning. Assets moved without proper authorization, leaving significant liabilities behind. Her fingers moved across her keyboard. Entity name? Carver Manufacturing. The words still stuck in my throat a little. I'm Milton Carver, the owner, or what's left of the owner. Frank appeared at my elbow, right on cue, with fresh scans. Andrea's eyebrows went up at the sight of his portable scanner, but she didn't comment. Professional courtesy maybe, or just too tired to care. These dates check out? She asked, tapping one of the transfer records. To the minute, my hands had stopped shaking somewhere between the truck and her counter. Bank timestamps are on page 4 of Exhibit C. She nodded, reaching for her intake stamps. The sound of each official thunk on the papers felt like victory shots fired. Amazing how something so simple can sound so sweet, isn't it? Judge Harrison's clerk is next door, she said, separating copies. He handles emergency reviews until 3:30. I'll send these over, but you should go explain it in person. Thank you. I gathered up my copies, already planning my explanation. That's when I saw it, or rather saw what wasn't there. There should have been a cross-reference note on page 6, linking the transfers to Margaret's estate conditions. The same estate paperwork I hadn't looked at since the funeral, because some memories are easier to box up than sort through. Frank must have seen something change in my face. What's wrong? Margaret's estate file, I said quietly. There's something in it we need, but I can't remember the exact language. We need to verify before we see the judge. My hands weren't quite as steady as they'd been a minute ago. The courthouse clock read 3:02 when I pulled out my phone. My fingers shook a little as I punched in the number for River Road Storage. 3 rings, then a bored voice answered, "River Road, this is Kevin. Kevin, Milton Carver here, Unit 147. I'm coming by in..." I glanced at Frank, who mouthed, 20 minutes. About 20 minutes. Need emergency access to my wife's estate boxes. No problem, Mr. Carver. I'll be here. Frank was already backing the truck out of the loading zone, tires chirping against the curb. "Talk me through what we're looking for," he said, catching yellow lights like they were green. "Keep your mind straight." I closed my eyes, picturing the documents like I used to picture machine parts during inventory. Trust summary on blue paper. Amendment page with Margaret's signature in purple ink. She always used purple. Beneficiary clause should be tabbed with red. Signature page at the back, dated March. Something. The truck's suspension groaned as we hit a pothole. Spring Street hadn't been repaved since Margaret was alive. What else? Frank pressed. There was something about protecting against exactly this. My throat tightened. Margaret knew our kids better than I did, Frank. She saw something coming. You know that feeling when you've forgotten something important, and it sits just at the edge of your memory, like trying to grab smoke? That's how that trust document felt in my mind. Vital but vague. River Road Storage looked exactly like it had the day we'd boxed up Margaret's things. Same faded blue doors, same gravel crunching under our tires. Kevin barely glanced up from his phone as we signed in. Unit 147 was halfway down the second row. The key stuck like always. You had to jiggle it just right, the way Margaret used to jiggle the back door when winter made it swell. The metal door rattled up, and that storage unit smell hit me. Cardboard and dust and forgotten things. There. I pointed to the stack of banker's boxes in the back corner. The one marked Margaret Trust. Frank helped me lift it down, and I knelt right there on the concrete. No time for dignity when the clock's running. The box was heavy with legal papers, each in its own plastic sleeve. My fingers caught paper cuts as I flipped through them, but I barely noticed. Then I saw it, a thin folder stamped Amendment Protective Clause in Margaret's neat handwriting. A yellow sticky note was still clinging to the corner, faded but readable. Just in case, Milty. Love always M. Just seeing her handwriting. Well, you know how it is. Like she was standing right there, one hand on my shoulder the way she used to when I worked late at the shop. Found it? Frank asked. Nodded, unfolding the papers with hands that weren't quite steady. The language was dense, lawyer stuff, but there it was in black and white. Paragraph 17B. Any unauthorized transfer of company assets bearing heir signatures would trigger immediate trust protection if bankruptcy fraud could be proven. The paper crinkled in my grip. I looked up at Frank, who was watching me with those steady eyes that had seen 50 years of factory problems. Solved. Margaret knew, I whispered. She put in a failsafe. If they signed their names to fraudulent transfers. I had to stop, had to breathe. Frank squatted down beside me, his bad knee popping. What exactly did she set up, Milton? I skimmed the paragraph again, legal terms jumping out like neon signs. Immediate forfeiture, trust reversion, bankruptcy fraud trigger clause. She made it so they couldn't. My voice caught as the full meaning hit me. All those transfer documents upstairs at the courthouse, covered in Robert's and Cynthia's signatures. All that proof of what they'd done. And here in my hands, Margaret's last gift, a legal trap they'd walked right into. I stared at Frank, the paper trembling in my fingers. "Let's get this under better light," I said, tucking the folder under my arm as we hurried back to the truck. The sun was bright, enough to read by, and time wasn't our friend for indoor reading. Frank cleared space on the hood, brushing away leaves and dust with his sleeve. I spread out the trust documents like I used to lay out blueprints at the shop. Everything in its place, everything telling its story if you knew how to read it. My finger traced the legal language, stopping at each crucial phrase. "Upon evidence of fraudulent conveyance bearing heir signatures," I read aloud, then skipped down. "Trustee shall cooperate with immediate protective measures." Another line caught my eye. "Inheritance protections shall reverse to shield trust assets from participant malfeasance." You ever have one of those moments when scattered puzzle pieces suddenly show you the whole picture? That's what was happening on that truck hood. "Frank," I said, my voice steadier than it had been all day, "remember those wire transfer authorizations, the ones with Robert's signature?" He nodded. "And Cynthia's initials on the board minutes. They signed everything." I pulled out my phone and started snapping photos, making sure each page was clear and readable. Every single transfer, every corporate document, they put their names on all of it. The afternoon light caught the trust paper's watermark as I lined up another shot. Somewhere in the distance, a church. Bell struck 4:45. We had time, but not much. "What exactly does this mean, Milton?" Frank asked, squinting at the legal language. I squared the papers, tucking them back into their folder with the care they deserved. "It means Margaret built a trapdoor. These signature—" I patted the courthouse folder with all the transfer documents. "They're not just evidence anymore. They're triggers." Frank's eyebrows went up. "Triggers for—" "What?" "For changing the whole game." I felt my back straighten as I explained. "This isn't just kids being greedy anymore. With this clause, it becomes fraud against a protected trust. The judge won't see it as some family squabble. She'll see it as somebody trying to break through legal safeguards Margaret put in place." I started reorganizing the exhibits, putting Margaret's trust clause right up front, where it would hit hardest. Behind that, I placed Robert's and Cynthia's signatures on every damning document. Then the transfer records that proved what they'd done. You know that feeling when a machine's parts finally align and you hear that perfect hum? That's what this was. Everything clicking into place, everything working like it was designed to. My hands weren't shaking anymore as I checked my watch. 3:47 p.m. The courthouse was 12 minutes away, if traffic held. "I need to explain this right," I said, half to Frank and half to myself. Clear, respectful, by the numbers. I could see the judge's face already. That moment when she'd understand what Margaret's clause meant. The trust requires action, once fraud is proven. It's not even optional, the trustee has to act. Frank turned the key and the engine coughed itself awake. "You ready?" I looked down at the folders in my lap. One from the courthouse full of betrayal, one from Margaret full of protection. My fingers found that sticky note again. "Just in case, Milty." "Yeah," I said, and for the first time that day, I felt the ghost of a smile. "I'm ready." The courthouse steps felt steeper at 4:15 than they had 2 hours ago. Every footfall echoed like a metronome counting down our shrinking window. Frank matched my pace, carrying the expanded file like it was made of glass. Remember those moments, before a big machine test, when you've triple-checked every connection but your gut still churns? That's how it felt walking back through security, watching our folders slide through the X-ray scanner. "Protective clause with mandatory triggers," I muttered, rehearsing. "Signatures proving intent, transfers documenting execution." The words had to flow just right. The clerk's office was quieter now, late afternoon settling into the buildings. "Bones." The same clerk looked up from her monitor, recognition flickering across her face. "Sir, I have additional documentation for the emergency filing from earlier," I said, keeping my voice steady. "There's a trust clause that fundamentally changes the nature of the claim." She picked up her phone, had a brief conversation I couldn't quite hear, then nodded. "Judge Martinez can see you now." The courtroom felt smaller and darker than before, wood panels drinking what was left of the day's light. Judge Martinez sat at her bench, reading glasses perched low on her nose as she reviewed our original filing. "Mr. Carver," she said, looking up, "you have new information?" "Yes, Your Honor." I stepped forward, hands steady now. I've located a protective clause in my late wife's trust that directly addresses this situation. Frank passed me the trust document, and I handed it to the clerk. If you'll turn to page 4, Your Honor, there's a provision that triggers mandatory trustee intervention when fraudulent transfers are discovered bearing heir signatures. The judge's eyes moved down the page. I'd seen that same focused look on quality inspectors reviewing tolerance sheets, searching for the detail that makes or breaks certification. "And you have those signatures?" she asked, not looking up. "Yes, Your Honor." I passed forward. "The transfer authorizations and board minutes. Multiple instances, all dated and notarized. Robert and Cynthia Carver's signatures appear on every key document moving company assets into their personal control." The fluorescent lights hummed overhead while she read. My chest felt tight, like someone was slowly tightening a clamp around my ribs. The wall clock ticked past 4:35. Judge Martinez tapped her pen against the bench. "This clause," she paused, rereading. "It specifically mandates trustee cooperation upon evidence of fraud by beneficiaries." "Yes, Your Honor. My wife." I swallowed hard. Margaret was thorough in protecting against exactly this type of action. The judge looked at the clerk. "Get Mr. Davidson from the trust department on the phone. We need to verify standing before this window closes." The clerk hurried out, and silence filled the courtroom like cotton wool. Frank shifted in his seat behind me. The second hand on the wall clock seemed to slow down and speed up at random. Through the windows, I could see the sun angle shifting, shadows lengthening across the courtroom floor. 4:42 p.m. The tightness in my chest grew with each passing minute. You ever watch a pressure gauge climb toward the red line, knowing the whole system could either stabilize or blow? That's what these moments felt like. The clerk slipped back in at 4:47, nodding to the judge. She carried a fresh sheet of paper that made my heart skip. Official Trust Department letterhead. Judge Martinez read it carefully, then set it aside and folded her hands. The courtroom felt like it was holding its breath. Everything we'd done today, every scrambling minute since Frank picked me up on that porch, all of it balanced on whatever she was about to say. Her eyes met mine, over her reading glasses. The wall clock clicked to 4:49 p.m. I gripped the edge of the counsel table, feeling the solid oak under my fingers. Waiting. Judge Martinez cleared her throat. "Based on the evidence presented and confirmation from the Trust Department, this court finds sufficient cause for emergency intervention." She lifted a stack of papers. "I am ordering an immediate freeze on all accounts controlled by Robert and Cynthia Carver pending full investigation of these transfers." My legs went weak, but I kept my spine straight. Through the corner of my eye, I saw Frank's slight nod. "Furthermore," she continued, "given the time-sensitive nature of creditor claims against these assets, I'm issuing emergency restitution orders to stabilize outstanding business obligations." She paused, looking directly at me. "Mr. Carver, the Trust Department will contact you regarding next steps." "Thank you, Your Honor," I managed, my voice steadier than my knees. The courtroom doors opened and I heard familiar footsteps. Robert and Cynthia must have been notified as affected parties. They slipped into the back row with their lawyer, all three wearing the kind of confidence that comes from thinking you've already won. Judge Martinez continued reading the order details. With each sentence, I watched that confidence crack. Robert's jaw clenched, tighter and tighter. Cynthia's perfect posture began to crumble as their lawyer leaned in, whispering what I assumed was a translation of just how thoroughly they'd lost control. You know that moment when you're testing a new machine and everything suddenly aligns. The vibrations smooth out, the output stabilizes, and you know you've got it right. That's how it felt standing there, watching justice click into place. "The court clerk will process. Are these orders immediately?" Judge Martinez concluded. "We're adjourned." I gathered our documents with careful hands, though my fingers wanted to tremble. Frank stepped up beside me, solid as a lathe base, as Robert and Cynthia huddled with their lawyer near the door. "Dad," Robert started, his voice sharp with disbelief, but their lawyer shook his head, steering them away before the word could become a sentence. Remember that cold night air that had cut through me on Robert's porch? Now it was Cynthia who looked chilled, her face pale as she glanced back at me before disappearing into the hallway. Frank and I walked out last, our footsteps echoing on the marble floor. The courthouse's heavy brass doors opened onto the plaza, where the late afternoon heat was finally breaking. A cool evening breeze swept across my face, carrying away the last traces of that morning's despair. Mr. Carver? A woman with a press badge stepped forward, notebook in hand. I'm from the Herald. Would you care to comment on the ruling about your children's actions in stripping their father's business? I thought about all those years teaching Robert and Cynthia about honest work, about building something real. I thought about Margaret, who'd seen this coming somehow and left me the tools to fight back. The documents speak, I said simply, and kept walking. Behind us, phones were already lighting up. I caught a glimpse of the Herald's breaking news alert. Local heirs frozen out after alleged business strip scheme. Frank's truck was waiting where we'd left it, that dented warrior that had carried us through this wild day. As I reached for the door handle, I heard more reporters arriving, their questions floating across the plaza. But I didn't turn around. You want to know something strange? Just 12 hours earlier, I'd been standing on a porch with grocery bags for luggage, thinking my world had ended. Now here I was, watching my children hurry to their cars while reporters scribbled notes about their disgrace. Need a minute? Frank asked quietly. I shook my head, climbing into the passenger seat. The vinyl was warm from the afternoon sun, familiar as an old work glove. Through the windshield, I could see the courthouse. Clock, 5:17 p.m. The deadline we'd been chasing had come and gone, and we'd won. The engine rumbled to life, and Frank pulled away from the curb. Behind us, camera flashes popped like welding sparks in the growing dusk. Frank's ancient radio alarm jerked me awake at 6, its tinny speaker crackling with the morning news. I'd slept better than expected on his garage cot, wrapped in the familiar smell of motor oil and sawdust that reminded me of countless late nights at the shop. Breaking business news, the announcer's voice cut through my morning fog. Local manufacturer's heirs face fraud probe as court freezes assets. Robert and Cynthia Carver, children of Milton Carver Industries founder, are named in emergency court filings alleging unauthorized transfer of company assets prior to closure. Frank appeared in the doorway with 2 steaming mugs. Thought you might want to hear this, he said, handing me one. The coffee was strong enough to strip paint, just like we'd always made it at the shop. Remember those dawn shifts, when the first pot was what got the machines running as much as the electricity did? I took a long sip and let the familiar burn steady my hands. Sources say the court order came just minutes before deadline, the radio continued, freezing accounts potentially worth hundreds of thousands. The Herald's business desk confirms multiple creditors have already come forward. They're going to hate seeing their names in print like that, Frank said quietly. He was right. Robert and Cynthia had always cared about appearances more than substance. Robert's country club membership, Cynthia's charity board position, they'd crafted those respectable veneers carefully. Now here they were, making headlines for all the wrong reasons. My phone buzzed. The trust department's number. Mr. Carver, the administrator said, we've reviewed yesterday's court order. Given the evidence of fraudulent transfers, we're prepared to offer full cooperation in unwinding these transactions. I appreciate that, I replied, keeping my voice even. My priority is stabilizing creditor obligations. Of course, we can begin this morning if you're available. The judge's order gives us significant latitude to move quickly. Another call beeped through. A reporter. I declined it and 3 more that followed. Let the documents tell the story. I didn't need to add commentary. Frank brought over his battered kitchen table calendar, and we started mapping out next steps. Follow-up filings, creditor contacts, account reconciliation. I'd built this business methodically over decades. I'd protect what was left of it the same way. Milton, a familiar voice called from the driveway. Tom Chen, my old steel supplier, was standing there looking uncomfortable. Got a minute? I walked out to meet him. Tom had stopped returning my calls months ago when the rumors about mismanagement started flying. I saw the news, he said, scuffing his boot against the concrete. Look, I should have known better than to believe that garbage about you running things into the ground. 30 years doing business, you never once missed a payment or cut corners. The apology meant something, I'll admit. Not enough to erase the sting of being abandoned when things got tough, but something. Those invoices you're holding, I said, nodding at the folder in his hands. Bring them inside. We'll sort them out. By mid-morning, 3 more vendors had reached out with similar messages. The story was spreading through our tight-knit manufacturing community, and the tide of opinion was shifting hard. Every hour brought new messages, mostly ignored, from reporters seeking comments on the family drama behind the fraud probe. I checked my voicemail once. 2 angry messages from Robert, 1 tearful one from Cynthia. I deleted them without listening fully. They'd had their chance to talk yesterday before the judge's ruling, before they thought they'd lose. Frank came in from another coffee run, shaking his head. Your kid's lawyer just did an interview trying to spin this as a family misunderstanding. Doesn't look like it's sticking. I nodded, watching another news alert light up my phone. The business section had dug deeper, outlining the pattern of transfers that had drained the company's cushion. Black and white evidence, laid out for everyone to see. You know what Margaret used to say about reputation? I asked Frank, who'd known my late wife almost as long as I had. It's like machined steel, takes forever to build, cracks in an instant if you don't respect the stress points. The radio was still murmuring in the background, cycling through updates. Each hour brought new details, new reactions, new cracks spreading through the careful image Robert and Cynthia had built. They'd gambled everything on the assumption that I'd go quietly, that I was too old, too tired to fight back. They'd forgotten who taught them about leverage in the first place. The weeks after a storm have their own kind of quiet. You ever notice that? How the air feels different once the thunders rolled away. 3 weeks after the court order, I sat at a folding table in Frank's garage, signing the last of the creditor agreements. My hand was steady, steadier than it had been in months, if I'm being honest. The trustees' weekly updates had confirmed what the judge set in motion. Assets returning, accounts unwinding, the mess slowly straightening itself out. Got something to show you, Frank said that morning, tossing his truck keys from hand to hand. If you're done with those papers. He drove us to the edge of town where the suburbs thin out and the pines start getting serious about taking over. The cabin sat back from the road, nothing fancy, just clean lines and solid bones like the kind of machinery I used to stake my name on. Owners motivated, Frank said. Price is right, and it's far enough out that reporters won't bother driving up here once they get bored with the story. I walked the rooms slowly. Morning light slanted through bare windows, catching dust motes in honest beams. The living room had good proportions, even empty. The kitchen needed work, but I knew my way around tools. A deck wrapped the back, facing east toward the tree line. What do you think? Frank asked. I thought about Margaret, how she'd always said we should retire to a place with trees. I think I'd better sign before someone else does. The paperwork went quick. Amazing how simple things can be when everyone's acting in good faith. A week later, I stood in my new living room with exactly 1 box, labeled Office Keepsakes, in my precise block letters. You accumulate a lot of things over 75 years. Funny how little of it matters when you really look. I donated most of the furniture, sold what I could, left the rest. But this box had weight beyond its size. I opened the curtains first, letting that pine-filtered morning light spill in. Then I cut the packing tape and lifted out the brass nameplate that had sat on my desk through 5 decades of deals, decisions, and daily grinds. The tarnish wasn't bad, just a gentle clouding that good polish would lift right off. I sat in the square of sunlight and worked the cloth in slow circles, watching my reflection sharpen in the metal. The letters emerged like they were rising through water. Milton Carver, President. My phone buzzed. The trustee's final letter. I read it twice, letting the confirmation sink in. Recovery milestones met. Accounts stabilized. Creditor obligations normalized. Clinical words for a clean ending. Frank's truck crunched gravel outside. I'd called him earlier, asked him to bring coffee and share this moment. He'd earned that much and more. Place looks different with the curtains open, he said, handing me a steaming cup. Black, like always. Some habits don't need changing. We took our coffee out to the deck. The morning air had that pine-sweet bite that reminds you you're breathing. Below us, the town was waking up, but distant enough now that its noise couldn't touch us. Been thinking, I said, about that cot in your garage. Yeah? Saved my life, that cot. Thinking it needs a plaque or something. Official emergency backup plan, maybe. Frank laughed. How about temporary solutions department? We'll workshop it, I said, smiling. The coffee tasted right for the first time in weeks. Back inside, I set the polished nameplate on the side table where the morning light would catch it. Tonight, when the sun settled into the pines, I'd sit here with a glass of Margaret's favorite bourbon and watch the brass catch the last light. Not a ceremony exactly, more like a quiet way to mark the moment when one chapter ended and another began. For now, though, I had coffee to finish and a friend to thank. The rest would sort itself out in its own time. I waited until the light turned honey gold before taking my spot on the porch. Brought out Margaret's old crystal tumbler, too. Seemed right for the moment. You know how certain things just feel proper when you're marking time's passing. The bourbon caught the sunset in amber waves, same color as the brass nameplate warming in my hands. I ran my thumb over the engraved letters, feeling each ridge and valley like they were chapters in a book only my fingers could read. Frank had headed home an hour ago, saying he needed to check on something in his garage. We both knew he was giving me space for this quiet ritual. That's the kind of friend he was, knew when to stand shoulder to shoulder and knew when to step back. The evening paper lay folded on the side table, another headline about Robert and Cynthia's ongoing financial investigation spread across the top. Their accounts were still locked tight as a drum, and the restitution process was grinding forward with all the mercy of an industrial press. Every transfer, every signature, every decision they'd made was being pulled apart under fluorescent lights and cold eyes. You might think I'd feel some satisfaction about that, watching their carefully constructed walls come down brick by brick, but mostly I felt tired and old, and ready to let it all settle into whatever shape it needed to take. The whispers had started in their social circles, I'd heard, the kind that follow you into country clubs and charity galas, that make people suddenly remember urgent appointments when you walk into a room. Their phones had gone quiet, no more invitations, no more business lunches. Amazing how fast a reputation can crumble once the first crack appears. Should have taught them better, Margaret, I said to the golden heir. Should have made them understand that respect isn't something you can just reach out and grab. A chickadee landed on the porch rail, tilted its head at me, then flitted away. Reminded me of how Margaret used to fill feeders all along this ridge, back when we'd just talk about maybe retiring to a place like this. Always planning for tomorrow, we were. I took another sip of bourbon, letting the warm oak notes roll across my tongue. Through the trees I could see the town's first lights winking on, distance turning them soft and harmless. My old office would be down there somewhere, dark now but still standing. Like me. The nameplate caught the sun's dying fire, throwing it back in proud gleams. I stood, joints creaking a bit. 75 years leave their marks, and walked to the fresh-cut pine rail Frank had helped me install that morning. The wood still smelled of sap and possibility. Found just the right spot, where the last light would hit it square on every evening. Set it down gentle, like placing a cornerstone. The brass settled into the wood, like it had been waiting for this moment. These exact coordinates of time and place. "Thank you, Frank," I said softly to the cooling air. For that 20 minutes that changed everything. Then, thank you, Margaret, for thinking ahead. For leaving me that lifeline when I needed it most. A light breeze lifted off the valley, carrying wood smoke and dinner smells and all the ordinary pieces of life that keep turning even when your world stops. My chin came up, steady as a plumb line. Not from pride anymore. Pride's what gets you in trouble. No, this was something quieter, something earned. The sun touched the horizon, sending one last shaft of light across my porch. It caught the nameplate dead center, making those engraved letters shine like fire. In that golden moment, everything aligned, loss and gain, ending and beginning, defeat and dignity. I heard myself speak, soft but clear as workshop bells. Respect is earned, not stolen. The words hung in the evening air like truth itself, then settled into the grain of the wood, into the brass of the nameplate, into the quiet of my bones. Simple as that, clear as that. The sun slipped away, leaving just enough light to find my way. Inside,